For every 90s kid that had an inkling of sports curiosity, the phrase backyard sports causes one to short circuit and often have a conversation with whoever said the phrase for at least 3 minutes. But that's not an indictment on the series of CD-ROM games that you could find at your local Circuit City. And if you haven't heard of Circuit City before, I don't know where do I even start? Alright, let me focus. The Backyard Sports series is an iconic franchise of games that will stick with an entire generation forever. The game consists of 30 kids that all happen to live in the same neighborhood, and they're all willing to duke it out on whatever athletic field they can find. However, amongst all of us, we seem to have a unanimous GOAT. Throughout all the games, Pablo Sanchez reigns supreme. He's often seen as the guy that can do no wrong, the best player in backyard sports history. But is he? You see, I noticed that whenever I hear that declaration, I never hear any follow-up evidence or some stats to back it up. So today, I'm here to try to settle all of this once and for all. Welcome to Most Virtual Player. The Backyard Sports series is one of the most unique franchises in video game history. It's one of the few connected sports franchises that have ever existed. There are only so many different sports games that host all of the same characters. The only ones I can think of off the top of my head are the Mario Sports series and the Mii's from Wii Sports, where Matt is a bad tennis player, but in boxing, he might as well be prime Muhammad Ali. Alright, again, not the point. What I've noticed is that whenever people usually talk about backyard sports, they usually talk about just one or two sports, whether it's a combination of baseball, football, or basketball. But there aren't just 3 backyard sports versions. There are 6. Backyard baseball, backyard football, backyard basketball, backyard soccer, backyard hockey, and backyard skateboarding. Whenever we talk about how dominant Pablo is, we usually talk about his powerful bat in backyard baseball, or his versatile abilities in backyard football. But the conversations usually stop there. What about basketball? How good is he in soccer and hockey? So I want to go through all of the games to reach my conclusions, not just one. Now I will say I'm going to ignore skateboarding in this video for the most part because there are only 12 playable characters in that game. Also, it's really tough. I tried playing through it to unlock all the characters. It was rough. It was rough going. Now in each of the 5 sports, there are multiple versions of the game to take a look at, so I think it's fair to try to find uniformity with all of them. The earlier backyard sports games had the ratings appear as skills on a range of 1 to 4. The players that were best at throwing would be able to throw 4 out of 4 footballs worth. Now over time, the games would expand to have the skill ratings out of 10, so a player's core skills would be out of 10 baseballs or 10 basketballs. I do want to say that this wasn't the player's actual specific skills, and it was a bunch of attributes that kind of were added into the main skill, and a lot of that was hidden to us. The leap from the 4-ball scale to the 10-ball scale was one of the many questions I had about the series, but throughout my online research, I wasn't able to find any answers. So I went to the source. I found 3 people that worked on the decorated series and got to ask them all sorts of questions about it. Eric Haldy was a game designer, art lead, and animator for the Backyard series and many other humongous entertainment classics. Nick Merkovich was a game designer and art lead who helped with the creation of the Backyard Sports franchise. Rafael Colanzo was behind the game's flawless UI, as well as an art lead and animator. During the course of this video, these 3 will be giving some deeper insight into the backyard sports world. Each card would be 4 out of 4 footballs or 4 out of 4 baseballs. Why did it expand to 10 out of 10 baseballs in the later games, or 10 out of 10 skill points on the cards?
You could probably say that it correlated with the introduction of the professionals, is to get more than just 3s and 4s, right? Like if you could, because there's a big difference between a 3 out of 4 and a 6 out of 10, right? But a 5 out of 10 and a 6 out of 10 can make a big difference too, right? So at the end of the day, if it doesn't mean anything to look at the cards because they all look the same, then it's kind of no point in having them, right?
Yeah.
Right. They should be informational. They should help you strategize your team.
Right. Even though there might have been something hidden in there, essentially we're telling you the truth, right?
Yeah.
So,
Right.
To be able to have more granularity was really where it came down to.
Apparently, a crew of backyard baseball aficionados allegedly were able to go into the code find the hidden ratings and put them all into a spreadsheet that could be found, but I won't use all those numbers for a couple of reasons. Those ratings say that each skill is on a scale from 1 to 100, and there are so many categories that all combine and contribute to the core 4 or 5 categories in each game. As tantalizing as using that chart is, I'm just going to stick to the standard game attributes that we see at face value. Because 1, I have no way myself to fact check the data, as I am very not good at this coding stuff, and 2, all of these hidden attributes only seem to have been found in the baseball games, but not the other games in the series. It would be very hard to judge Pablo Sanchez on one scale for 5 games, and then on a completely different scale in another game. So for all of this, I'm only going to use the ratings that they put in front of us, the ratings that they put in the game. So the 1 to 10, baseballs, footballs, basketball, you know. Also, I'm going to pick from as many backyard games as I can that are computer games and not the console versions of those games. Because the console version and the computer version are a little bit different in terms of gameplay and the ratings and all the stuff that's available to them. I don't want to deal with that. I only want to deal with the computer-only games because I feel like when we talk about the Backyard Sports series, we often highlight those computer games. The other reason is that in the Atari era, the ratings of some of the players get tweaked a little, and I don't want that to bring any confusion to the table or myself. Just myself too. With that out of the way, let's start with baseball. So the visible stats are hitting, running, pitching, and fielding. And when you add them all up, Pablo Sanchez clears every one of his neighbors. He's one of the only non-pro athletes that has over 30 attribute points. When you average out all the abilities of each neighborhood kid, he's above average in every category. Yes, even pitching. It doesn't seem like it, but there aren't that many good pitchers amongst the non-pro players. Unlike running, where no one is listed before a 4 out of 10, every other category has players that range from 1 to 10. But usually, being a bad batter is often supplanted by being good at something else. For example, Vicky Kawaguchi and Ricky Johnson are just 1 out of 10 batters, but they can at least make up for it by using their speed on the base paths. Pitching, however, doesn't really have that. Just because you're a below average pitcher doesn't mean you can't pitch at all. It just means that you don't have a consistent arsenal. Pablo, on the one hand, has a pretty good fastball. Everything else is kind of a crapshoot. Now, the one thing Pablo is best at is his batting ability. There are only 4 backyard kids with a 10 out of 10 batter rating. Pablo, Jocinda Smith, who is seen as one of the best contact hitters in the game, Ahmed Khan, and Mikey Thomas. The main separator between these 10 out of 10 hitters is Pablo's strike zone, which is on the smaller end compared to the others. The room for error when pitching to Pablo was so much smaller in comparison to pitching to the other players. It was either a ball or it was right in Pablo's sweet spot, which is the entire strike zone. Pablo is also seen as an excellent fielder, but I think that aspect is a little bit overrated just because of how short he is. Now, Sanchez was great in the outfield, and the better you are at fielding, the easier you can locate fly balls, and it does matter, believe me. However, if you put him in an infield, there was always a chance that the ball was either going to be hit over his head or just thrown over his head.
Height mattered in pretty much all sports. Baseball for sure. Same concept that you're talking about with the overthrows or being able to get a line drive. That kind of stuff, the height would actually matter. Basketball, it mattered, as far as
Rebounding.
Yeah, the rebounding or blocking shots, that kind of stuff. We were able to probably add a little height to their jump, though, sometimes to kind of keep them in the mix. Soccer, height was for the goalie, and then kids and defensive headers and things like that was a pretty big deal. So yeah, 100%.
Despite all of that, even with him being one of the shortest characters in the game, it's clear that Pablo Sanchez is head and shoulders above the rest of the crew. But you already knew that part. Let's check out a sport that he's not that good at. We're going to backyard soccer. In backyard soccer, Pablo isn't as dominant as he is in backyard baseball. In fact, he isn't dominant at all. He has average kicking, average ball control, average defense, and his running stat has gone down from a 9 to an 8 in this game. But here's the funny thing about this. He is still one of the best soccer players in the neighborhood. While soccer isn't really his main sport, very few of the kids are very good. The overall average skill point total in soccer is 21.23. In backyard baseball, it's 23.8. even though Kimi Ekman is downright horrendous. Lisa Crockett takes the top spot in soccer, followed by Vicky Kawaguchi, Dante Robinson, and Reese Worthington. On the one hand, I get it. Soccer is a tough sport to play, especially when you don't spend that much time learning how to dribble and kick. But at the same time, really, Stephanie Morgan? Get it together. That's unacceptable. When you average all the backyard kid stats in soccer, Pablo Sanchez is only below average in 2 of the categories. It feels as though with this game there are more spread out skills. Pete Wheeler can run but doesn't have ball control. Dimitri can kick but doesn't have ball control. Now Kimi Ekman can control the ball but can't really run at all. The cool thing about backyard sports is that a lot of stuff feels on brand with the characters. Angela Del Vecchio's clumsiness carries over from game to game, while Ricky Johnson is really good at kicking in football and soccer. In my opinion, that's what makes Pablo Sanchez stand out in every game, because he can lean back on his running skills while not being as reckless as Pete Wheeler, someone who canonically had to be reminded of what goal to shoot at.
Every sport would have its own superstar, but then would have a different superstar. But the skills that we gave Pablo just translated so well to everything.
Yeah, exactly.
He ended up being good at everything, and then that just made people gravitate towards him more, and that made him our Mickey Mouse, sort of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
100%. That's exactly right.
Moving on to backyard basketball, Pablo Sanchez isn't the best in that sport either. It's actually Jocinda Smith, who is the peak of versatility, followed by a surprise character to me, Ronnie Dobbs. It comes as a shock because he seems to get a quickness boost that he just doesn't have in baseball or soccer. Ronnie Dobbs is also tied with Vicky Kawaguchi and Amir Khan, and then we get to Pablo, which is really interesting. Now, Pablo Sanchez's worst attribute in backyard basketball is inside shooting, which is a 3 out of 10. It's also his worst attribute across all of the games. And I don't think that Pablo Sanchez's 3 out of 10 inside scoring matters, because let's look at the best player in the game, in my opinion, Dimitri Petrovic. You see, Dimitri is one of 2 players with a 10 out of 10 outside shooting. It's Dimitri and Kenny Kawaguchi, and Dimitri has 7 more skill points than Kenny. The reason why I have Dimitri as a top spot over Jocinda is because the 10 out of 10 outside shooting stretches across the entire court. You know how in NBA 2K, regardless of rating, your shooting success rate falls off after a certain distance? Well, this version of backyard basketball doesn't have that in the slightest. So that makes Dimitri a literal nightmare to guard anywhere on the court, which can't be said for most of the other players. Since the basketball goal is 10 feet, I assume, well, it's a height to where dunking is a special circumstance in the game. Jump shots seem to be the true king skill in this 3-on-3 game. So even though Pablo Sanchez is a 3 out of 10 inside the arc, his outside the arc prowess makes it not matter, in my opinion. Honestly, I really don't think it matters. Now for backyard football, I'm going to use Backyard Football 2002 for this assessment, even though I really wanted to talk about Randall Cunningham. Maybe that's another video for another time. In backyard football, Pablo is the runaway best player in the game by a considerable margin. He's the only backyard kid with over 30 skill points to his name, and he finishes with 33. What interests me here is that Pablo's running stats in this game are a 10, while in basketball his quickness was a 9, and in soccer it was an 8. In baseball it was a 9. Once again, Pablo's weakest attributes are still above average for the league. Despite his small stature, he's still able to block and tackle at the same clip as Ahmed Khan and Annie Frazier. This makes Pablo a dangerous and versatile threat on both sides of the ball. He's able to be an electric pass catcher, a dynamic running back, or even a dual threat quarterback on offense. Basically, the only way you would waste his talents is if you put him at the line for some reason, and even on defense, he's a really good ball hawk. I wouldn't dare throw his direction even if your player had the height advantage. So there is one game left to dissect, and it's a game that I really didn't play growing up, and it's backyard hockey. So it's kind of a wild card for everything because I didn't have the game, so I forgot who was good and who wasn't. Turns out that Pablo Sanchez is just good at that too. Yeah, so just like Sally Dobbs in backyard baseball, Pablo Sanchez is the all-around hockey player. His versatility on the ice makes him tied for Dimitri Petrovic and a bit above Jocinda Smith for the lead amongst the neighborhood. Pablo Sanchez being an 8 out of 10 in everything, once again, clears the average for every stat in the neighborhood. But I would say that between him and Dimitri, it's about perspective, honestly. So now that we've covered all 5 titles, we have to add all the skills up and see who really is the best all around in every game. While Pablo was the best in backyard football and baseball, there were other neighbors that were also pretty high up on the list. So when we tally up all the points from all 5 games, what do we get? Well, Pablo Sanchez leads with a pretty comfortable margin with a whopping 170 skill points out of the 230 possible across all the games. The next closest player overall is Vicky Kawaguchi with 155 skill points. There is a 15-point skill gap between Pablo and the second place person, and a 65-point gap between Pablo and the worst athlete all around, which is Jorge Garcia, which, to be fair, he has stated that he really doesn't want to be here. I get it. Pablo Sanchez's greatest skill is consistency. Across all of the games, there's nothing that he's really bad at, besides inside scoring in basketball, but we already talked about that. Pablo does most things above average, while the other backyard kids have clear weak spots in certain sports. Vicky Kawaguchi can't hit in baseball, she can't tackle well in football, and don't ask her to play defense in soccer either. Jocinda Smith should be nowhere near a pitcher's mound, and isn't a fast runner in any of the games. While Dimitri excels in hockey and basketball, he is one of the worst baseball players in the game. Only Kimi Ekman is worse. Think about that for a second. The girl that they only let play because she has a cool backyard. And if you think I'm being mean, I didn't say that. The game did. Honestly, I have only one more question left. We know how Pablo stands with the neighborhood kids, but what about the pros? The pro players in most of these games were often some of the best players in the game easily. Barry Bonds, Randall Cunningham, Marty Cordova, Cade McNown? In backyard baseball, Pablo Sanchez still manages to beat everyone out, even Barry Bonds. You see, Barry Bonds only has an 8 out of 10 hitting ability, on par with Nomar Garciaparra and Chipper Jones. He's also only a 9 out of 10 fielder compared to Pablo's 10 out of 10 fielding. The pros are definitely put on an interesting scale if I do say so myself.
Every pro had to have one visible category that wasn't just maxed out, right? Like, so that you could see that they weren't just going to dominate all the time, right? So McGuire, obviously, you just make him slow, right? So you can't say he can't hit for power because he's Mark McGuire, right?
Yeah.
In Ichiro, you can't say he's slow, right? Because he's Ichiro, right? So having to find ways to give them like a little bit less bass and a little more treble, right? And on those guys sometimes was kind of the easiest approach.
Backyard basketball is an interesting case because that game only has 2 pro players in it, Kevin Garnett and Lisa Leslie. Garnett only has 29 skill points, while Lisa Leslie has 28. In backyard football 2002, Pablo Sanchez is still the best player in the game, beating the likes of Junior Seau, Steve McNair, and Rich Gannon. Now, Pablo in this game is an equal passer to Brett Favre, an equal runner to Pete Wheeler, and even as good of a blocker as Annie Frazier. Again, I want to say, he's not bad at anything here. The one thing I will say about backyard soccer is that it's a game where a lot of the pros are actually better than Pablo Sanchez. Tiffany Milbrett, Brandy Chastain, Kobe Jones, Henry Gutierrez, and Carlos Valderrama are just a few of the pros that are all better than Pablo at soccer. Pablo's greatest skill in this game is running, but he's still better than some pros. Marcelo Balboa, Preki, Zach Thornton. In backyard hockey, Pablo and Dimitri are better than every pro in the game. Even Mike Modano, who has a 10 out of 10 shooting and passing ability. Pablo's all-around abilities surpass that. Looking at his stats in relation to the pros has made me realize something. Pablo Sanchez might not dominate every game, but his ability to be put in basically every spot in every sport is unparalleled. No other backyard kid can possess that game-to-game consistency. Now, before we wrap this up, I do want to take some time to highlight some of the other players on the list. First of all, when Jorge Garcia said he didn't like playing sports, he was not lying. For someone who loves baseball, Stephanie Morgan is better in every other sport except soccer. Despite being one of the fastest players in the neighborhood, I often remembered using Pete Wheeler in backyard baseball and backyard football, but I guess his lack of versatility really wasn't made up for by his immense speed, which is surprising to me. Now, on the professional side, Brian Ascuri has the same soccer skills as Mikey Thomas. while Tim Hudson's ratings make him seem just happy to be included. Also, Marty Cordova. So that wraps up my findings from the Backyard Sports series, but I do have time to answer one more question. Can Pablo Sanchez skateboard? Well, in backyard skateboarding, his stats are 10 out of 10 air, 7 out of 10 speed, 4 out of 10 flip, 5 out of 10 spin, and 6 out of 10 balance. So the answer is yes. Now, skateboarding had some characters that they wanted me to unlock, but I'm going to be honest, that game is really tough. But I'll make it up for you. I won't leave you completely hanging. I'll let you in on one little secret. Pablo Sanchez speaks English.
Soy Pablo. ¿Quieres jugar? Okay, don't tell the other kids, but I speak English. I learned Spanish in school.
It's a little known Easter egg, and it's now your reward for watching to the end of the video. Have a good one, y'all. See you next time. Thank you for watching to the end of the video. If you want more of that good secret-based content, feel free to go to our Patreon. Special thanks to Eric, Nick, and Raphael for their contributions to this project. They made the video so much better. If you want to hear more from my interview with them, you can find that full interview on Patreon coming soon. Have a good one, y'all. Bye!